Hello, and welcome to the dark, or welcome back to the dark, depending on whether you've been here before. My name is Scott Swenson, and I'm the host of A Scott in the Dark. And in this particular episode, we're going to take some time to talk a little bit about site surveys, or visiting the location where your haunt is actually going to take place. Now, for some of you, this is not necessarily that important because you own the space, you know where you're going, you've been there all the time. The reason I decided to do this particular episode at this particular time is this time of year, I actually am doing site surveys for new haunts for the season. And this past week, I just did two, one in Orlando and then one in Clearwater, just to kind of, get a vibe for what the space looks like, to actually walk the space with the client. And, whether you are in a position like me where you are working for somebody else, or you're looking at a new space for yourself, you're considering something that might be, I don't know, a cheaper rental space, or you're just looking to look at a new way to envision your current location. Doing a site walk or a site survey can be very beneficial. And I just thought I'd do a quick show. I don't know how long this one's going to be, but I thought we'd do maybe a quick little show to talk about some of the things to look for and why it is so important. So first of all, why is it so important? For me, I don't like to actually start writing anything until I've actually seen the location, because to me, looking at and I'm pretty visual and I'm pretty good at interpreting maps and photographs and that sort of thing. But until I've actually walked through it, I don't really know exactly what the space is, how it works, and I just kind of like to get a general overall vibe for the space. For example, one of the sites that I looked at in Orlando for a potential gig this season is actually a series of buildings that are connected: indoor space, outdoor space, semi-covered space. So it was important for me to kind of walk through it and perhaps look at how are we going to cobble together these spaces into one cohesive experience. And the interesting thing is, when we were looking at maps of this cobbled together space, they were cobbled together maps because each of the entities, although they connected, the ground plans were separate. So we had to kind of overlay them and fit them together and make a kind of a little puzzle out of it. And it gave us a pretty good idea as to what it looked like. But then, the other thing that I found out is the clients want to take out some walls and they want to add some new egress points, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really, really important to make sure that that we had walked the space, talked the space with everybody, so everybody knew exactly what the bare bones were going to look like before we started to add the coolness of the haunt inside. The other reason, or one of the other reasons for me as a creative, that I think it's important to do a walkthrough is, quite often when you look at photos, you don't get, and I'm going to be really wishy-washy here, but you don't get the vibe of the space. Perfect example in my career was the Vault of Souls. The Vault of Souls never would have become the Vault of Souls had I not actually walked through the space and felt the echoes of the past, or the creepiness that was living in there. It helped me create what eventually became the haunted attraction. So I think the first reason, and probably the most difficult to pin down, is walk through the space so you get a general vibe, just a general feeling of, oh, here's what this space feels like. And I know that for people who are very analytical, you're going to think that doesn't make any sense. But I just don't know how to explain it any other way than to get a vibe for the space, understand what the space is. There are some artists, especially like sculptors, for example, who will get the piece of the raw material, whether it's a stone or wood or whatever, and they'll kind of wait and see what the wood wants to be made into or what the stone wants to be made into. And yes, I know that sounds a little sort of new agey, and but again, there is something to that, especially for a creative mind. So for those of you who are not, who are just listening to this first part and going, okay, I'm about to switch over and not listen to this anymore. Let me give you some specifics as to things that you can look for that will help you when you're trying to define what the vibe, quote unquote, is of the space or of the room. Um, Look at the, like, for example, look at the wall and floor treatments. I'm a firm believer that if you've got really cool, aged, broken down flooring or walls or ceilings, paint jobs, these are things that you work really, really hard in a studio or pay somebody a ton of money to try to replicate. If they're already there on site, find ways to use them. Um, Real aging is far more realistic than pretend aging, no matter how good it is. That doesn't mean you won't have to go back and touch it up. That doesn't mean that you won't have to light it properly. But look for those things. Look for those changes in floor covering. You know, if you're going into, I don't know, let's say an old department store, for example, and you've got carpeting in one part and tile floor in another and concrete floor in another, help that inspire your design so that you don't fight, you know, don't, when you've got the concrete floor that's got gashes in it from the loading dock equipment or whatever, don't try to make that your elegant ballroom. Make sure that you make that something that would be appropriate for that floor covering or that floor style, so that you don't have to cover it all up. You've got all this great natural age or patina, so utilize that. I think that's something that you won't see from a ground plan, and you rarely, you'll get an idea from photos, but I don't think it's nearly as impactful as actually walking through it. Because I think, you know, walking it going, oh, here's this, here's that, there's cool, there's, oh, what's that weird little box, electrical box over there? Don't touch it because it might be live. But once you find out that it's not live, you may discover that it's a great prop. Okay, so see what's there. Starting with the floors and looking up to the walls. Pretty much any sort of scenic piece that you can find, especially if you're in an abandoned space, could inspire you. There was a project I was working on in Canada where I walked through. It was, interestingly enough, it was an old anchor store for a mall, and when we were in the receiving area, and the receiving area, one thing I did not realize until I walked it, the receiving area had a whole catwalk system, had a whole grid system over the top of it that was used basically for storage, but was rated to hold humans. I mean, you could have, you know, active loads up there. You could have all kinds of things. So what that did was it opened up a bunch of possibilities for the design. Now, unfortunately, that project didn't quite come to fruition, but from a design standpoint, I never would have known that had I not actually walked it. And yes, I might have seen it in photos, but I don't think you realize, oh, wait, can we get up there? How do we get up there? There's a ladder over there, but there's stairs over there. And the break room, you can access it from where you want to put the break room. Great. Let's play with this. It gives you a whole nother series of crayons in your crayon box to color with when you're coming up with designs. Another thing to think about, from an inspirational standpoint, is what is the natural lighting of the space? And when you do a site walk through it with the lights on and the lights off. I know that many haunts, or most haunts, take place after dark, but sometimes they will start before the sun's gone down completely. So you need to see what the light is. Sorry, for those of you who are just listening, I just took a sip of my iced coffee. Sorry, my throat was getting a little parched, so I thought it was important to be able to keep talking. So look at what the natural lighting does. You may find that there are some great little dark nooks and corners that you can enhance with theatrical lighting. You may discover that you're going to have to cover over very large windows that you thought led into another indoor space, but that indoor space has skylights. So look at what the natural lighting looks like. And if you've got an indoor-outdoor space, walk it at different times of day if you can, so that you can see, okay, it doesn't get dark here until, and remember, if you look up sunset, that's when the sun goes below the horizon. That's not when the space actually gets dark. And that's usually anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes after the actual sunset. So just keep those things in mind. It will help you with design. It'll help you decide, do I need to cover this? Do I need to Put up blackout curtains in this area. Uh, just kind of look at what the natural lighting does and utilize it not only to find out what you need to fix based on light bleed, but also what you can enhance using theatrical lighting. Because you may discover, like for example, there's a great window, and you wouldn't like there's a window around a corner somewhere. Okay. And what you wouldn't discover is that when the lights are off in the room you're standing in, but the lights are on in the room that the window is coming from, you get this really cool spill light coming down a long hallway. Well, you might want to not necessarily use the light that's in there, but since you've got a window back there, you might as well use it as a lighting position so that you can create that same effect only in a color of your choosing. So again, look at lighting, look at the natural lighting of a space. And for those of you who've been listening to my shows for a while, you know that I'm always about the sound and the way things sound. Natural acoustics, especially in found spaces, can be really, really cool, or really detrimental. So you have to kind of listen while you're in there. If it's got an echo that makes it sound like you're alone, great. Because what that will do is it will amplify when people get scared, even in different parts of the haunt. And when they scream, it'll echo back and guests will automatically go, uh-oh, something is scary ahead. If you are in a carpeted space with padded walls, maybe it's time to do an asylum. No, but what it will do acoustically is it will make the room, in essence, dead, and not necessarily in the best way. So you need to figure out, do I need to add like a bass, and I don't mean low bass, I mean like a basic background audioscape to make this space feel like it's not an office somewhere, because things sound like offices, you know. And I know this sounds weird, but if you compare it to film, you know, whenever they shoot film, they'll actually shoot a segment of the area just completely without any dialogue, without anything extra, just so that they get room tone. And what they'll do is they actually use that room tone to go back in and and edit the sound and make it more smoothly transition from one thing to another, from one shot to the next. But if that weren't important, then they wouldn't do it. If people wouldn't notice it, then they wouldn't do it. If you watch student films, they rarely do room tone. So what you'll get is you'll get these edits where all of a sudden the air conditioner turned on. And so you'll have a two-way conversation where everything the one person says has no air conditioning, and everything the other person says, it sounds like they're standing in a completely different place. And it's not that you necessarily identify it as, oh, the air conditioning turned on, but you identify it as, oh, that's a different location, or it sounds different, or you hear a click between the two back and forth. So listen to your acoustics, figure out, you know, walk through and you know, growl or snarl or scream and see what it sounds like. Because if it echoes, in my opinion, in most cases, that's great. If it doesn't, maybe those acoustics would actually help inspire your design. If it's very quiet, maybe you decide, well, I'm not going to do Vampire's Castle. I'm going to do a contemporary bloodsucker who has a doctor's office. What better way to get blood than to be a doctor, you know, or a surgeon? Because again, it sounds like a more office-y kind of space than it does a big cavernous castle. So listen to that. I wouldn't say look at that. Listen to that and use that as inspiration. So I think those are some pretty specifics, ways to break down that general feel, but also trust your gut. I mean, if you are the kind of person who recognizes just how a place feels, let that inspire your design, because you'll come up with a much more organic design, and it'll be far more cost effective because it will fit the space, whether it's conscious or subconscious. Okay. The other reason that I think it's important to do site surveys or site walks is what I call the real reality. You know, we may dream as we look at a ground plan or at photographs what we can actually put in there, but until you're really standing in the space and you get out your tape measure and you measure stuff, you go, oh, wow, you know, if I make this a bedroom scene, I've got room for a bed and half a dresser, and that's not going to be terribly convincing. So maybe we don't make this the bedroom scene. Maybe we make this the walk-through closet. So you have to kind of have that moment of, of reality of, will everything fit? And it may help you reorder things. I'll put this here, I'll put this here, I'll put this here. Now, obviously, this is not as big a case when you're dealing with a big, wide open warehouse or a giant old, I don't know, Sears store or whatever. You realize, oh, I got tons of space. But I will say, if you are in a big open space that has apparently unlimited space, make sure that you have a big old tape measure with you so that you can just double check and make sure that everything you think is going to fit in there is going to fit in there. And also maybe even take a tape measure and go, oh, I don't really need this whole space. Maybe I'll just use 3/4 of it and save money in my construction, save money in my casting. Or you're going to have to spend a lot of you're gonna have a lot of dead spots if you make it too big that you don't have a cast to fill it, or you're gonna have a lot of black walls. And a few black walls, a few dark hallways, that's absolutely nothing can be fun. But if you're using it as padding or filler, it's not. So just kind of keep space in mind, the reality of the space. And what I would suggest is make sure that you can walk through everything. Maybe even use masking tape to tape it out if you're using a big open space. Use masking tape to tape out where your walls are going to go. They don't have to be 100% accurate. They will eventually, obviously, but just make sure that what you think is happening can really happen in your space. The other thing that I think is interesting in doing a walkthrough, especially if it's an old found space, are things that aren't on the ground plan that were perhaps, I don't know, left there by someone who was there before, or big open electrical panels. I mentioned that earlier, make sure it's off. But I've been able to utilize things that are actually part of the space and part of the building that I wouldn't have known were there had I not done a walkthrough. So, and sometimes they're really cool set pieces and things that would cost way, way, way too much to build. The one example that comes to mind, again, from the Vault of Souls, in the basement at the vault, there is a drive-through window from when they had a drive-through bank downstairs, and it's scattered with buckshot. I have no idea how it happened. Nobody can really tell me the story, but it was great inspiration for coming up with something completely new and different. And I didn't have to build it. It was already there. So it was just sort of found inspiration that tied right back into the building. The other thing to take a look at is, how are you going to get your audio, lighting, power cables distributed throughout the haunt? Obviously, in many cases, if you're working in a big warehouse, just do them up and over or around or however. But you may discover, if you're doing something that has multiple rooms, that you're going to have to find clever ways around it. Working on Undead in the Water, which is actually a ship, you can't drill through the ship. It's metal walls and it's historic. So you have to find clever ways to work around how to do that power distribution. And you may discover you have to do multiple power drops in order to do the distribution appropriately. Or as we've done in a couple projects, find rechargeable low voltage lighting fixtures and mark where they go. And at the end of every night, you take them down, you put them in the recharger, and then you put them back up. One of the companies that I've worked with actually has magnetic ones, which are great because you can just go clunk, 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 put them in where they need to go. They stay right there. They look like they're permanently installed. And then at the end of the night, you go through, you take them down, you put them in the recharger, and you're ready to go for the next night. But you won't necessarily know that until you do the walkthrough and you actually see where the doorways are. Are there any cut throughs in walls? Are you going to need to drill through walls? Can you drill through walls? All of those sort of cabling and distribution challenges. The other thing to look into, and this is especially if it's a new site, everybody looks at the site plan and goes, oh, this would be great. We'll put the opening room here, and we'll put this room there, and we'll put this room here, and we'll put this room there. And then opening night starts, and they have no idea where they're going to put the guests before or after the haunt experience. So make sure you have enough room for queuing. And it will take, if you're lucky, if you have a a very popular haunt, which we're going to hope that everybody does, if you have a very popular haunt, you're going to need a lot of queuing. And I would say figure out what the square footage is of your actual house, and then add at least a third of that outside for queuing. And then you have to add more depending on how you batch, how many people go through it one time. Do you have access to time ticketing or some sort of beeper system, pager system, so that you have a virtual queue of some sort? But just make sure that queuing is taken into consideration, and also make sure that after you exit, there is a place to put, well, you know me, I'm going to say put your place to grab a soda or your place to grab popcorn or your gift shop or whatever, so that you can, again, get a little extra money out of them on the way out. So don't just look at the space and go, okay, we have just enough room for the haunt. You're selling yourself short. And you may not realize that until you actually walk it and you realize, oh, well, you know what, we can put the queue out here on the sidewalk, or we can put the queue in this other space, or whatever. We had a situation just this past week where I wanted very badly to use a really cool part of the space, but if we did, we wouldn't have any queuing. And so that wasn't going to work. And just as important as queuing, if you're a freestanding haunted attraction, where a car is going to go, make sure you've got parking. And again, I'm sure some of you just think of that as, those of you who are operationally minded, you immediately think, oh, well, duh, that's just obvious. And those of you who aren't, just went, oh, crap, we don't have any place to put cars. But you need place to put cars because people aren't going to walk to your haunt in most cases. All right, unless you're in the middle of a downtown setting. But, and even then, most haunts downtown are not in the neighborhoods you want to walk through. Just saying, I'm just being realistic here. So again, this is kind of the reality section. Make sure that all the things that you think are there or that you need to be there are actually there. And then finally, and probably most important, but least fun to talk about, is, of course, safety. Make sure that everything is ADA. Make sure that you can get your pathways in at the right width. Make sure that your surfaces, I talked about changing surfaces. Make sure that the transitions from one surface to the next are something a wheelchair can go over, or a guest won't trip over in the dark. Make sure that your heights, I always put my hand on the top of my head with my thumb and my pinky knuckle stuck up, because I know that is about 6'8". And if I can walk through everything like that, it's the ADA height to go through everything. Make sure that there is appropriate egress so that your fire marshal doesn't shut you down before you even open. And I am not an egress expert. I do not claim to be. I know just enough to sort of say, hey, do we have enough exits? Do we have enough emergency exits here? And I do know that in a haunted attraction, and by the way, this is something that does change from location to location. So check with your local fire marshal, check with the local laws, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're doing the site survey, make sure that you can have enough emergency exits or emergency egress, so that you don't have, so that you can open, quite honestly. It's not just being altruistic and saying, well, we have to take care of these people if there's a fire, which honestly you do, because one incident that is bad will shut you down for years. So you don't want to do that. But what we did discover in one of our site surveys is that we had to actually cut a hole in a wall because we needed one more emergency egress. And it is my understanding that is, and I put that caveat out there because I am, like I said, not an expert, but it's my understanding that egress is based on linear walking, not as the crow flies. So if you're standing in your haunt without any walls up and you say, oh, well, we're close enough to that exit, and then you put your walls up and you've quadrupled the length of walking time to get to that exit, that's a whole nother story. So just keep those kinds of things in mind as you do the walkthrough. Again, have your tape measures out, have your laser measurers. I don't know what those are called. Anyway, have your measuring devices ready to go, so that you can actually answer all those questions while you're actually in the space. Look out for pointy things. I know that sounds silly, but if you are in an abandoned space, there's always going to be something that is ragged, rough, sharp, trip overable, head bangable. Make sure you know where those are so you can either cover them or avoid them. So yeah, and also look at what spaces have fire suppression, because that's a huge expense if you have to add it, and figure out what areas can and cannot have any sort of overhead coverage. Just make sure that it's safe from a fire safety standpoint. And then finally, what I will call actor and tech care. Don't forget that you're going to need some sort of break space, either outside the property where people can get ready and store costumes, but you're definitely going to need some sort of technical hub inside your haunt, to put a dimmer rack and an audio system and all basically the hub. And that works so much better if it's actually in the haunt itself. And I firmly believe that if you've got the space, you should also make certain that you have access corridors to the various locations of the haunt from that tech hub, so that if something goes wrong with an animation, lighting, audio, whatever, you can get somebody there quickly. If something happens with, if there's a guest actor interaction that's inappropriate, you can send somebody there immediately and get them there quickly. And so again, make sure that your staff is taken care of as well as your guests. So that includes, all those behind the scenes things. I really like, working in Florida, we do have the option with some of our haunts to do like a break tent outside of the haunt, that enters through a back area. If you do that, in my opinion, you should probably work in some sort of climate control, whether that's gigantic fans or even an air cooling unit. If you can put it inside a climate controlled building with the haunt, that's great. If you do that, remember sound, because haunt casts are loud and obnoxious, and you want to make sure that they are not bleeding over into the haunt experience itself. So it's like, in the middle of this dark, creepy hallway, you hear somebody scream, and this guy, he screamed so loud, he peed himself and he threw popcorn everywhere. And you don't want to hear that in the middle of the dark and scary moment. Otherwise, the people won't scream and pee themselves and throw popcorn all over the place. All right. So I think if you look at those 4 basic areas, look at your inspiration during your site walkthrough, look at the reality of what is really there, look at your safety, and look at the ways to protect or make your staff's job easier. I think all 4 of those areas are important reasons to do site walks and site surveys, especially if you're going into a new location. And even if it's your own existing location, take a walkthrough and just make sure that all those checklists are covered. You may find new ways to do things. Who knows? Who knows? So I guess that's about it for this particular episode. I hope it was helpful. Like I said, it's something that I know I'm going through right now, and so therefore I assume everybody else is as well. And let the space inspire you. Let it be what it is supposed to be. Let's see where I would love to. This is normally where I say, okay, you can see me at such and such, and you can talk to me at such and such. But I don't really have any shows planned at the moment. Sorry, Trans World kind of kicked my butt, so I'm not going to be. I'll be back next year, but I don't really have anything scheduled at this moment. I will be on the road starting. Well, this is being recorded in early April. I will be on the road at the end of April. I'll be in Indianapolis. Then in May, I'll be in Houston for most of the month, and then for a week in Indianapolis, and then in June, I'm on vacation for a little while, but that's about it. What I would like to recommend, though, is if you are not a member of my online newsletter, my monthly newsletter, please sign up. Even if it's just something that you look at, click, and delete. I don't sell your information. You get 1 email from me a month, which basically gives you an update on not only these shows, but Green Tag Theme Park in 30, which is the other podcast that I do, any appearances, any book updates, any and then occasionally just like cool stuff. And every single newsletter has a members only section, members only content. Sometimes it's a video, sometimes it's a download, sometimes it's a contest for free swag. And it's super easy to sign up for my email newsletter. Just go to scottswenson.com, and right underneath my picture on the landing page, there's a link. Click it, fill out your information, and you will get a little note from me once a month. That's it. All right. So that is this episode of A Scott in the Dark. My name is Scott Swenson. And until next time, rest in peace.